As you know, KEPSA is an umbrella body of the private sector, and we bring all the private sector together, the associations and the corporates, from micro to the multinationals and all sectors. And we have about 90 associations, including all the big ones that you know, KM and FKE and others, KB and others. Then, of course, then we bring the SMEs and the what we call the startups, and then the medium, large enterprises with a reach of over 1 million enterprises in the country. And we have a reach of reaching out through our members. We host what we call the International Chamber of Commerce Kenya, and that gives us a reach of the different chambers of the world to about 45 million businesses that come together under the World Chamber of Commerce International. And so that's really how we are organized. And so as we were looking and reaching out to CEOs this time, and July 2017, when we released the CEO's Business Index Survey, that's just before the general elections, we thought that we should sustain this, because then it started allowing us to target initiatives, target our messages, to engage government differently, development partners differently as we go after elections. So as drivers of the economy, the private sector recognizes that politics and economy are intertwined and have to be approached with the same awareness and interventions. History has been a good political economy teacher for all of us, and especially us from the private sector. We've seen how politics can affect the economy at both extremes, positively and negatively, and that's why we come together as mass stakeholders through the Kenya Daima. I think most of you have engaged with us in this year through the Kenya Daima campaign. We'll be releasing a statement also tomorrow on how we see from the Kenya Daima, which brings together private sector, religious society, civil society, women, youth. And when I say business, again, it's all. We even have bodabodas, the leaders and all. And we'll be releasing a statement tomorrow towards that as we go into the final days before election, and now how we are feeling the temperature is going. And so that's different from what we are releasing today. And that will also cover the pledges signed by the different presidential candidates and coalitions, and so that the public, and we will be hoping you media, you publicize that so the public can hold these candidates into account as we go into Tuesday for elections. And so in 2017, we also showed our maturity as a democracy and managed 2 elections without any major political intolerance, which had a positive impact and boosted confidence in judiciary. We saw the economy grow from 3.8% in 2017, despite the 2 presidential elections, which was sustained to 5.6% growth in 2018. The economic growth witnessed in after the elections in 2013 and 2017 attests to the positive impact correlation between political events, in this case elections, and the economy. Equally, we cannot ignore the potential negative impacts of political events on the economy, as it's the case in the contested general elections in 2007 that we all remember. The economy was growing at a commendable rate of 6.8%, but due to the post-election violence then, it went to partly 0.28% growth in 2008. And so that's really what our benchmark has been since then, to ensure that we are monitoring that carefully. So the snippets of the CEO's Business Confidence Index, the index report that we are to release collected view from a total of 173 business leaders at the level of CEOs, MDs, COOs, and directors from small, medium, and large companies. The respondents were drawn from all different sectors of the economy, including agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, and hospitality, finance, ICT, building and construction, wholesale and retail, and service industries. Overall, the business leaders expressed optimism in the 2022 index, having an overall score of 61 points compared to 44 points in 2017, signifying a 17-point change, and 53.8 points in 2013. That is a 37% increase in optimism on the economy in 2022 compared to 2017. And I must stop here and say, from where I sit and talking to a lot of businesses, both locally and foreign, there's been calmness in our elections this year, again signifying that maturity. And we are hoping in these last few days, it will not be what we would call calm before the storm, that will remain that calm. And that's why we'll be issuing that statement tomorrow. Some of the interesting factors behind the 2022 optimism that were cited by the leaders include political stability, their plans to substantially increase the numbers of full-time employees, while at the same time having a strong will to retain most of the full-time employees. The business leaders' optimism has increased against the backdrop of the Ukraine war that has disrupted value chains, resulting in price increases in fuel and energy, wheat and fertilizer prices, which are critical inputs for Kenya's manufacturing and agriculture sector, coupled with a drop in the supply of the dollar leading to depreciation of the Kenya shilling, as well as the drought, where Kenya is facing the largest drought in 40 years, and I know many other parts of the world are facing the same. But we also are the backdrop of COVID, so we're also recovering from COVID, which Kenya has been doing pretty well. Today, as we launch the Business Confidence Index, we want to reiterate that the private sector is confident on this economy, and it's our call to everyone to practice their political right with decorum to ensure that we protect that which we have built. We are aware that we are just from a COVID pandemic, and global economic turmoils are also affecting us. And so with that, I would like to ask Maggie Reri to give a little brief on a bit of the details, and then Victor will take us on the specifics of the presentation, and then we'll...
Context. The CEO Business Confidence Index seeks to gauge the outlook in the eyes of the CEOs. And the reason for this is that most CEOs have what you call a helicopter view of the economy, and therefore they are able to give an indication of what is likely to happen in the future, which would be a good indication of the economic performance. Now, in terms of who we targeted in the methodology, we were very clear to target a broad range of CEOs. The methodology was done through, we did send links to various CEOs to participate online, and we also did face-to-face interviews. So a blend of the two methodologies allowed us to have a very good sample size with a variety of CEOs from large companies and from medium companies. Now, in the way we analyze this data is very important, and the way we analyze it is not only done in Kenya, it's the same way the Business Confidence Index is analyzed in the US, the UK, and so on. So whatever indicator we're showing you today, you can actually compare it with other countries. So we asked 3 questions mainly, and those are the ones that I used to compute the confidence index. And the first question is their perceptions of the current economic conditions vis-a-vis 6 months ago. And then the second one is the expectation of the economy 6 months ahead, and then the expectation of their own industry 6 months ahead. So the combination of that is used to compute what you call a composite index, and that's what we are showing today as the Business Leaders Confidence Index. So the index is a scale of 1 to 100. So if the scale is moving closer to 100, or the index is closer to 100, it therefore means that the confidence or the optimism towards the economy from the CEOs is very high. So that's the methodology in a nutshell. And in this report, we have shared with you the profile of the companies that participated in terms of their turnover, their sectors, and so on. And just also to add as a last comment, the participation was not only from KEPSA members. Of course, KEPSA members participated, but we also got a broad view of the various private sector companies in Kenya. So thank you.
There was a December holiday, people resuming, so we targeted the CEOs earlier before, unlike this time that we are doing it days to the election. 2017 we did the same days to the election. In 2012 we did it in 2012, late 2012, because of the December interruptions, and then the election had to be held in March 2013. So in retrospect, if you look at the results we've had in the last 3 elections, so in 2012, the overall confidence index was at 53.8 index points. In 2017, we were at 44 out of 100 index points. 2012, as we released these results, we had 61. So there are variations. And 2022, we are at 61. It's something you could ask and interrogate why. And even having at 61 index points this time, there are different, that's overall, right? There are different index points for the different sectors. So let me just take you through what the CEOs in different industries across different sectors are talking about. So we see an average of 61 in average index points, but for agribusiness and manufacturing we have 60. For tourism and hospitality we have 68. Finance and ICT we have at 58. Construction we have at 62. Wholesale and retail we have at 62 again. Other services 57, and the rest that we amalgamated is giving us 63 index points out of 100. You might want to ask, why is tourism the most optimistic? You know, I'll give you just a little bit background of this. We are coming from a COVID pandemic where education sector and tourism sectors were the most affected. In fact, the surveys we did in the course of 2020, 2021 were actually showing that education, tourism were the most affected, the worst hit across all the sectors. Now, with the relaxation of the COVID pandemic restrictions, this sector has been the most optimistic you'd expect, and actually that's what the CEOs of those companies told us. It's compared to when you are, completely low in your expectations and things get better for you, you tend to have a much higher optimism. So I needed to explain that, because perhaps the layman understanding is that this sector is the worst hit, so why would they still be the most optimistic? So that's actually the reason they were giving us. And in these finance and ICT sectors tend to be they tend to have lower optimism. Reason being that even when we did surveys in 2020, 2021, they were the best performing. So they don't expect much improvement, all right? So if you're at 80% performance and you increase by 5%, that's really not an optimism you talk about. But if you're coming from 20 to 60 to 68, that's a real optimism. So I wanted to clear that. So that's the reason. But overall, across all different industries, the business leaders are optimistic about their industries performing and their own companies. I'll give you the rest of the details. Compared to 2017, where we were at 44, and 2012, where we were at 53.8 index points. Business confidence is higher than the previous pre-election periods, so that's what I've just explained. The current economic conditions for the CEOs, remember we restricted this to CEOs, MDs, COOs, or country managers, because those are the same level. No one else answered these questions apart from those with decision-making authorities at that level. So current economic conditions are expected to improve vis-a-vis 6 months ago. The CEOs expect the economic conditions to improve across all industries compared to 6 months ago, rising from an average of 47 index points to 66 index points for the economy. But across their different respective industries, they expect that to rise from 47 to 69 in the next 6 months. Specifically, the rise in optimism and business expectation is highest for the tourism and hospitality at 85 index points, and for wholesale and retail at 70 index points. These sentiments are reported against the backdrop of Ukraine war that has disrupted value chains, resulting in fuel, energy, wheat, fertilizer price increments. Yet they're still more optimistic against that backdrop. So these are critical inputs to our economy. Then if we go right into the business growth and prospects for different industries, we asked the CEOs questions about their own companies and about the industries where their companies belong to. So in terms of optimism for own company and for the industry where their companies belong to, at a total sample level of 173 companies, for the most part, own company growth prospects were higher than industry growth prospects. The business leaders tend to have better insights about their own company as opposed to the overall industry where their companies belong. But they have an helicopter view of the entire industry. So again here, hospitality and tourism sector have the highest growth prospects, followed by wholesale and retail. If you look at wholesale and retail and manufacturing and agribusiness, once the borders were opened, and again because we rely a lot more on imported inputs into our own industries, the prospects tend to rise higher. So this is just in tune with what we should all expect. Reasons for lower growth, for those who expected lower growth, because it's not everybody that expects higher growth prospects for their own industries. For those expecting lower growth prospects for their companies, which were 23%, and for their industries, which were 29%, these expectations were tied to failure to address high cost of production. We all know this is something that you in the media have been talking about cost of doing business in the country. Inflation is not a Kenyan problem alone. If you research, you'll find it's actually a global problem. Rise in petroleum price is not a Kenyan problem alone. And change of government. So in change of government, what they're mostly saying is, the unpredictability of what the next government would be. Over the last 10 years, we've had the same administration. What is the next government, is likely to look like? So that is also something that we're talking about. And just being very unsure about the general economic conditions coming in the next 6 months and so on. So that is the reason why they were most, for the 23% companies and 29% industries, were a little bit less optimistic about the future. High cost of production is the main reason why the businesses project low industry growth in the next 6 months for those 23% of companies. Then political stability tends to be at the heart of optimism, business optimism. Again, we asked, what are your reasons for higher company growths and reasons for higher industry growth? So we are comparing company where these CEOs lead and the industries where the businesses fall. Stability after elections, a lot of business leaders are optimistic about stability after election. So this tends to drive their optimism. And again, having a stable economy after elections. The others are expectation about their own business growth and the growth of the economy. If we go to company performance and indicators, different indicators, we looked at some of the factors that the businesses expect either to decrease or increase or remain the same. Prices of inputs, businesses expect prices of inputs to increase, again because of inflation. We rely a lot more on imported raw materials, so they expect these ones to increase. They also expect, as a result of increase in input prices, the prices of their own products and services will also increase. So we should also expect that. In terms of demand, how do they see the demand of their own products and services? At 50%, they expect a rise. At 32%, they expect to remain the same. And about 15% expect that the prices will reduce prices. There's something on employment. Half of the companies expect to maintain their level of employment. 35 expect to hire more full-time employees, while 15% expect to reduce the number of full-time employees. So on that, 35% would maintain 35% expect to hire more full-time, 50% expect to maintain, and 15% expect to reduce the number of full-time employees. Again, we are going through the gig timing, the gig economy and so on and so forth, where we can hire more, but they're not full-time. So you increase employment, but you don't increase full-time employees. So again, those are the things that we're actually prospecting to have. The next one are key challenges. Operational cost and taxation are the key challenges that businesses are talking about. And so high cost of operation, high taxation, and high cost of living were the top mentioned key challenges facing companies. The most debilitating challenge for those in agriculture and manufacturing were high business operational costs. For business in the wholesale and retail sector and tourism and hospitality industries, their key challenges were actually reduced number of customers and again, high cost of living. When you have high cost of living, you tend to spend less on recreational activities, on tourism and so on and so forth. In the building and construction sectors, their key challenge were high taxation. In terms of recommendations, because again, we also asked them, then what do you recommend? The most recommended intervention across all industries were tax concessions. And when we asked what are tax concessions that we're talking about, reduction in tax rates, exemption in other cases, in order to improve the business conditions. Particularly businesses in agriculture and manufacturing called for interventions to lower the price of raw materials. And when we asked them how, they talked about the IDF, that is import declaration fees. Can we reduce a little bit excise duties? Can we do something around energy prices? And I think that there are interventions around energy prices that are ongoing, and maybe we'll meet that in the near future. For businesses in tourism and hospitality, improvement in the state of the economy so that there is a little bit of improvement in the cost of living. They tie the cost of living to their own prospects. So that is the call for interventions to improve the state of economy and the living cost. Other interventions touched on programs to increase access to credit by the next administration. So that brings us to the end of it. I think Maggie already talked about the firmographics, Maggie? Yes. So these are the results that we have today from a bird's eye view of the CEOs of different companies, 173 of them. Thank you.
Let me just add one more on tourism, and the optimism of tourism, apart from what we heard from the CEOs. We also realize we are in the summer season, and so that's when our tourism numbers go up, not only in Kenya, but around the world. I think even happening in Europe with airlines and the numbers and how airlines are not even able to cope up. That also shows why there's optimism, so that it's a summer, so there's high optimism that the numbers will increase, which is naturally there in any other time, despite even except for COVID season. But also because of COVID, there are those who didn't travel then those 2 years, so we are seeing an increased numbers of travelers because of that. And I think also the realization that the world can close down and you can have money in your pocket and not travel. So we're seeing a lot more numbers of people traveling, both locally and internationally. But also, I guess, the other reason we're seeing with why there's high optimism in 2022, despite the challenges we are facing. We've mentioned about the drought, which is the worst we've had in 40 years. We've also mentioned about the Ukraine-Russia war and the effect that it's having on the value chains. We've talked about also the effects of COVID that are still being felt in some of the industries. I think with the change in the manner of the COVID, in terms from pandemic to more endemic, it also creates optimism that we'll recover much faster, because then we're not going through the pandemic as we were. So that could also give some of the indications of why you're seeing a lot of optimism, more than we saw in 2017. 2017, of course, also we're also going through drought. But I think that for this year, because of what we've come from, especially coming from COVID and also being summer for tourism, that's some of the rise in optimism could be that, but also the calmness. I think this, as I said again, this is the first time I think from the business perspective, and generally Kenyans, we're feeling that the election period has been more calm than it has ever been before, and that does really raise the optimism, and that's why we're really calling on our leaders to keep that calmness even as we go through the final stretches before election and even after election, that we keep that so that this optimism can turn around the economy, especially in the areas that it's been affected by, of course, our own internal issues, but also the external issues of COVID, drought, and Ukraine and Russia war. So I'd like to open up for questions and comments and clarifications, and then we'll share with you this report so that at least you can internalize it a little better. And even after this, if you'd like more clarification, please do get in touch with us and we'll clarify the information.
Finance and ICT had the lowest index. Did the CEOs mention why they are that less optimistic? Are there things like the tightening of the fiscal policies and the cigarette taxes, all that?
The CEOs of the DSC are solving this recently. And looking at some of their concerns in terms of external factors that will strengthen their business in the near term. Of course, stable economy stood out, but the shipping also poked up right there. And I know this has been a contentious issue. So talk to us about shilling stability, and from your survey, whether that is something that came up, stability of our currency. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think I'll take the first one. I'll take what I can, and then Victor and Maggie can also chip in. On the finance and IT, I think Victor did mention the reason why you realize that in terms of when we looked at the growth sectors, when we were doing our surveys around COVID, finance and IT were actually up there. And so you'd expect, because not much is changing, so there's no higher optimism because they're already doing well. Unlike some of the sectors like tourism, which were doing so badly, and education that time, and now they've seen some improvement, so there's higher optimism. So remember, it's an optimism idea. So if you're already doing well and you're not seeing any major changes going to happen, then you may not have as high optimism, unless a sector that was doing so badly and that signs to see improvement. And so that's what we're seeing with finance and IT more than anything else from what the CEOs were saying. For them, they're saying it's going to be good, just as it was during COVID for them. And then on the shilling, yes, we've had issues. I think currency is not, it's not just Kenya. I think we've seen currency changes. I think you can see the dollar and the euro are now 1-to-1. So that and of course for it's more like younger economies, then we are affected much more. So we did, and I think it has been a concern. We have had discussions even with CBK, just trying to really stabilize, making sure there's access of dollars at some point. Remember, there was a real challenge until one of the companies actually threatened to close down, and so we did engage with CBK and agreed on some measures, and that has calmed the situation. And I think the continuous engagement and conversation with CBK is really harmonizing that. But I think Victor had mentioned that came up in the survey, and maybe he can respond a little bit more on that.
On the shilling, but I think let me first start with the MPC versus our survey. We work in partnership with Central Bank to reach out to CEOs that then give the opinion to the MPC survey. And largely, the group that CBK targets are large enterprises. And they are very specific about that. No medium, no small, no micro. We do this survey across all the different sizes of businesses. So there would be differences. I think even in 2020, 2021, when we're doing surveys, you'd see variations between micro enterprises, small enterprise, medium, and large. So that is why this is encompassing all the different sizes of businesses, but the MPC targets large enterprises with specific turnovers and specific number of employees. So again, that's why they're not very comparable. If you look at the demand for dollar, demand for shilling between the different sizes of businesses, it's different. Their demands are different. The shilling, or what you'd call the inflation we are seeing on our currency, is not a Kenyan problem. Look across Africa. Look how much we've been able to sort of maintain the changes in our shilling versus the dollar, and then maybe you'd be in a better place to answer that question. But just to answer you directly on that, we're actually also in an electioneering period. We are concerned about money laundering, you know. It's not just us talking about it. The governor's has talked about it. Recently, we've seen the CS, Dr. Machangi, talking about it. So there's a very targeted approach across the whole government to reduce instances of money laundering. In an electioneering period, you know, the velocity of money is different from any other period. So that is something that we should not forget, that what period are we talking about? Yeah, so that is why there's a bit of tight control on the money circulation and checking the sources of all these monies. Yeah, so on inflation, and again on the tightness of the shilling, do not forget to include the fact that we are actually in an electioneering period. Dr. Matiang just said the banks have run out of 100 bills and 200 bills. Why? You see? Yeah, so that's why, as a regulator in central bank, they also have to check on that. I guess that clarifies that.
Mike, do you want to say anything? Yeah. No. I don't think we're seeing anything else. I think if you look at the report from the CEOs, they just mentioned that when they were asked some of the things that they're looking at in the next 6 months. So of course, inflation came up. And we're just explaining that part of what we're seeing with inflation is not a Kenyan problem. It's a global issue that's happening because of the global issues that are happening in the world. And so that is expected to have come up as one of the reasons that the CEOs would respond to and say, as they're talking about taxes, they would mention inflation. But I think from where we sit, we are working very closely with central bank to just keep managing that to make sure that it doesn't get out of hand. And I think central bank has a good hold on it. And from the discussion we had with after their MPC, we feel confident that they have a good hold on it. Of course, we'd all want to keep seeing it stabilizing. We've not seen it's moving, but it's not at a place where it creates major panic. As I said, there was a time when we felt that there was a lower foreign currency and forex, and we did engage CBK, and they found a way to resolve that issue. And so we're not feeling it's a major issue. But in relation to the survey, and I think that's why we want to keep our comments on, is that inflation was one of the things that the CEOs raised as they were raising some of the concerns they may have going this next 6 months, as they're talking what are some of the things they would like to, that could slow their growth or their optimism in the economy.
From the survey, you mentioned that the banks are not really as optimistic as the people they lend to. That's kind of interesting in view of the fact that there's global inflation, they're also experiencing that here. There's a global supply chain issue. So if the people who finance the businesses are less optimistic compared to the businesses they finance, and in view of the fact that the central bank has just begun approving the risk-based pricing proposals, which will enable the banks to lend, I'm wondering what exactly is that?
So I think let me clarify that again, and I think he raised the same question. Let's understand it from the perspective. It's not that they are not optimistic, but comparable to some of the other sectors. So and we said, because if you look at sectors like tourism or education, which were highly affected by COVID and have seen recovery, so of course you expect higher optimism than sectors that were already doing well and are continuing to do well. The optimism will not be as high because they're okay. So let's differentiate that. It's not that there are less optimism of the economy than other sectors. It's just that the rate of optimism between certain sectors and other sectors is different just because of the margin of growth and yes. So I think we need to understand the index from a perspective of we are comparing a sector that was, for lack of a better term, in simplest term, going down, then starts growing, from a sector that was growing and continues to grow. Yeah. Yeah.
I would think that the perception,
Yeah.
the scoring, you say it's at about 60%. I thought it would be
61.
higher. Am I being too optimistic?
For the finance and IT is
For the-
58.
For all the people you
So for the total, the average is 61. And so for the tourism and hospitality, 68. For the finance and it's 58. So it's not even that big. You're just seeing that one has higher optimism than another just because they were not growing at all, while another was doing well. So the optimism remains okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why is it not at 70? Why is it closer to 70?
That's a good question. Yeah. That they would even higher optimism.
Yeah, I thought they
Yeah.
were more optimistic.
Yeah. I think
Why is
sometimes.
it higher?
But that's all. The CEOs just feel they are fine. They are okay. They are growing okay. The banks are doing well. They are delivering profits. So they are not seeing something that has changed drastically for them, unlike for the tourism and education and other sectors. So yeah. So remember, optimism is it's not scientific. It's more of a feeling. This is how I really feel about where we are going. Yeah. Okay.
On the same point,
Uh-huh.
can I say the optimism?
Aspects, but then there's also what could derail that, and those are some of the things now they raise. If inflation gets out of hand, if we don't sort out some of this taxation, that could derail our optimism for the next 6 months. Yeah.
I think we can add a comment or?
Yeah. Just
Let's
I think she's clarified. Remember that this is a whole year's assessment, looking 6 months back and 6 months ahead. So from where you're standing as a CEO, how do you compare your current conditions vis-a-vis 6 months ago? How do you compare your current conditions vis-a-vis the next 6 months? That's a whole 1 year assessment. And so if they're telling you that their current optimism is at 61, there's something that I think you might have missed. That 6 months ago, the optimism was at 47. Yeah. All right?
I'm being too ambitious to ask my
And it's okay.
Vis-a-vis currently at 61. And the next 6 months, for different industries, manufacturing is seeing 65, industry and economy. So there's expectation about economy, there's expectation about run industry. So for manufacturing, the expectation is at 65. For economy it's 65. For their own companies and industries, it's at 69. For tourism, was at 46. And for the economy, it's at 72. And for their own companies, is at 85. You get it, eh? And the reasons are what Carol was explaining about. Finance, 6 months ago, and tech for the economy, the finance again expect the economy to improve much more than their own industries. That's also something that is a bit startling. But remember that these two, ICT and finance, in our last 4 surveys since 2020, have been the best performing sectors. And they've been reporting high profits. They've been reporting more employment, particularly for ICT. Yeah, so I think that should be able to clarify some of
We
the
can take
questions.
the final batch of
So let me
questions.
just throw in my final comment. What have you speak about the expectations Jackson cases around? with the sentiment in the city?
Interesting.
I don't know whether you asked that question.
Yes. So when you look at, again, what Victor talked about, political stability, when you looked at the 6 months and that will keep the optimism, so political stability is one of them. So I guess that comes in with the runoff and rejection of elections, all that. So if that changes, then the optimism will change. So what maybe we should do, which I think you're raising a good point, is maybe after 6 months, we do a similar one to see the same remains, and if the same conditions have remained or they've changed. Yeah. So it's a political stability captures all that they're going to remain optimism as long as there's political stability. So if that changes, something will change in all these sectors.
Yes, let's take the last batch of questions. Let's start with the gentleman. Just your name, organization, and question.
People need to the highest level of optimism. I think this aligns to the CBK and PC service that we saw last week, also showing that optimism on just the election is better than the previous ones. Holding other factors at constant, just looking at the election as a cyclical event, how would you explain that optimism? You know, hold the inflation, hold everything else that we've been dealing with, just be specific to the
Elections.
You say the feeling of better political stability,
Yeah.
survey also shows what the same level of optimism.
Yeah.
My second question is closely related to the last in terms of runoff, in other elections, political parties. In terms of the interruptions we see from elections, we saw that very much in 2017 when we had a Supreme Court ruling and report, if I may call it that. I can't remember the specific one on that. I know you couldn't quantify, couldn't give me a figure of how much the cost of the event is on the economy in terms of the installment and so on. We've seen some retailers saying they shut on election day and so on. How do you quantify or how do you quantify the impact of just the event, the day-to-day happenings on the business and commerce? Thank you.
Okay, let me try that. Okay, there's one more here.
There's one more.
Okay.
Still on the finance sector, did the CEOs mention anything about the change of policies which, in terms of taxes, most of which came into effect since July?
Last question, perhaps? Okay, thank you. Can take those.
Okay, so I'll answer the first two, and my colleagues here can respond to that. That's all neat as a standalone. I think what we're seeing as a country is that I think we are maturing as a democracy. So despite that it's still an event and high expectations of an event, it's like a wedding or waiting for exams, we still hold it like a big event and we have the anxiety and all. But I think we're maturing as an economy where we realize, it will come and go, And like before, if you notice before, 3 months to elections, you'd feel the tension in the air. You didn't even have to be told, you could tell. Now, even some of the visitors we're getting from other countries, they come, they say, yeah, we hear you guys are having an election. Before they would write and say, Kenya is having an election, we're not coming until 6 months after elections or 3 months from elections. So there's a sense that we're maturing as a democracy. Secondly, I think the whole idea of the Supreme Court, I don't know if it's a thing that we should always turn to, but I think it has given that confidence that if there's a dispute, there's a place for it, unlike the streets. And maybe that's what used to create a lot of anxiety, that what if there's a dispute? Can we arm ourselves? Can we start closing our shops, barricading our shops, shopping and all that? So we're not seeing that because people feel like, in case there's a dispute, there will be. And we've seen even run to elections, there's been so many disputes and they've gone to court and they've been resolved and we've moved on. Up to I think now there's a case that I think will be heard tomorrow or something, against still challenging some of the candidates. But we are not stuck on that. Before, if there was a court case, we'd all be stuck and we'd be thinking, we'd be waiting for you people in the media to be showing us live for what's happening in the courts and all that. So that I think has changed, and I think that's what is giving the optimism, because what business is, and business is very sensitive to the feeling, to like if there's tension in the air. So business reacts to that very fast, and especially and that can tell you with the tourism sector. tourism is being hospitality sector is not a must do. It's not like I have to buy salt or sugar to have. Tourism is I really want to go for a holiday. And so if there's something happening, I don't have to. But to see the optimism in the tourism sector tells you something has changed in our environment. And that's good. And that's what we'd like to maintain. And I think that's what we are calling on our leaders and all ourselves in each person to be able to carry that peace banner so that we keep that, so that those sectors are not affected, because we know what happens. If they're affected, we are all affected, in our employment, in all our jobs, from the suppliers to the employees and to the owners of those organizations. Can we quantify what this will cost in terms of a runoff? I think it's too early to tell. So far, we still know our elections are very expensive. It's something we've been raising from a private sector perspective, that how could we really, what are some of the laws that could be passed by Parliament that could really reduce the cost of our elections. We tried to be part of pushing the campaign financing bill. Didn't go too far in the last Parliament. We're hoping the next Parliament can adopt it. That's one of the things. But the other things that I think we can do, and we've been talking a lot even with IEBC, as you know, from Kenya Daima perspective, we've been meeting with all these institutions and discussing with them some of the things that are happening, and also offering solutions. And hopefully with time, as we settle into our election cycles and democracy, some of these things will change. I mean, for me, from where I sit, I keep saying, I can't wait for the day when we don't even know how Chebukati looks like. If you go to many of these other countries, you do not know how the electoral commissioners look like. You don't see them, you don't hear them. People just vote, and that your vote will be counted, and there will be some announcement somewhere. And that can reduce some of what we see, the expectations that we put on them. And so we hope to get there one day. The second thing that I really hope we can get there as a country, and because we have been a leader on mobile money, if I can trust my money to go through a mobile phone, my money, I should be able to trust my vote. The day we get to where we can vote using our phones, and so as long as you can, and if you don't, your phone is not working, there's a place you can go and vote, or you can use your computer. Those are some of the things that we hope one day we'll get to, and with the changes we are. So yes, I cannot respond right now in terms of can we quantify what there in terms of business the runoff will cost. Maybe if there is, then maybe it's a good question you've raised. We could try and quantify that as much as possible and be able to put it out. On the taxes, if the new taxes in the finance sector have had a change in optimism, if it was responded to.
Thank you very much. In our recommendations, there were a general recommendation across all industries was around taxation. So this is not just for finance. You're the one who asked this?
Yes.
Yeah. It's not just for finance. Remember, finance sector is a purveyor, all right? They get money, they lend. If there's an increase, they top it up. So you would actually expect that the other sectors that borrow from finance would be more concerned about the increase in those taxes than the financial system itself. So they would just pass it on. So that increase is what you'd expect to affect more sectors than their own financial sector system. Of course, eventually when people are not able to borrow more than they used to, then the system, the financial system also gets affected eventually. But it's really not a serious concern for them. The concessions that across all sectors they were asking for are like, excess duties. Can we reduce this? And that's something that has been on our table in terms of expanding the tax base so that we can start having a conversation around the tax rate. Let's not beat ourselves so much. At 17% of GDP being collected in tax rates, that is a super good performance. If you're able to collect, to bring more onto the tax bracket, a discussion we're actually having with KRA in our roundtable, then we should be able to start having a conversation on, can we now reduce these rates? Because you have more, you are maximizing on volume, and reduce the rates. But currently we are collecting 17% of tax revenue, is 17% of the GDP. For a developing country, that's really an excellent performance. Go research more a little bit about that. And the other one was on what Carol was saying. If you mature as a democracy, countries like Denmark, for instance, you just go and pick your ballot, you go home with it, and then you mark and go and post. So that's the maturity she was talking about. But can you be able to vote from your mobile phone right in your house? As you mature, can you imagine? You're going to collect a ballot. The vote is next week. You mark, and on Tuesday you're taking it to the post box. Yeah, so thanks a lot. I think that's all I would want to add.
Let me just mention that there is a new tax policy that's being developed. We are part of that hopefully will answer some of the concerns that the business has for the next 6 months. Hopefully it can come with the next administration. It can be fast-tracked, and we can have that so that some of the things that are being asked addressed in the survey by the industries on taxes and what they would like to see in some of those taxes, we hope that can be captured in that tax policy.
In the new tax policy, I don't know what you have to say about having a review after every 5 years, or is it too early to comment about it?
It's early, but I think it's a good idea. I think because the environment keeps changing, and especially for developing countries. For mature economies, the environment doesn't change that much. For developing countries, because we're growing, there's a lot of change, and a review every 5 months would be a good idea. And
5
so,
years.
5 years, sorry, not 5 months, 5 years, yes. Yeah. I don't want to close for anyone. If there's any last burning one, we are happy to respond to, and then we'll give you the survey results, and hopefully to see some good publishments about it, especially as we go into elections. Yes. As you know, KEPSA is an umbrella